AutoCAD for Civil Engineers at Liverpool John Moores University Revision Sessions. Exercise 2, creating a shape using relatives coordinates. This is part of a series created to help you revise. They are not intended as replacement for attending your tutorials. There is no substitute for tutorials in AutoCAD under the guidance of your tutor. In our previous exercise, we created a simple shape using the XY or absolute coordinate system. As explained at the end of the video, this method of drawing is very limited, as when a drawing gets more complicated, it's very difficult to place any lines accurately. Whether we realize it or not, we regularly use relative coordinates when we measure. How long is that wardrobe? From the left to the right, it's 300 millimeters. The fact that we say from there implies we're using a point as a reference. In this example, the right-hand side of the wardrobe is 300 millimeters away from the left. That is 300 millimeters relative to the left-hand side. We use this system all the time in everyday life, but we're not aware of it most of the time. When we use relative coordinates in AutoCAD, we're using the same approach. The door is 15 millimeters away from that wall, or it's 2000 millimeters down the hall. The door is therefore at a distance of 2000 millimeters relative to the front of the house, the beginning of the hall, and so on. Typing in distances using absolute measurements for this type of drawing would not be possible, as it would take far too long to work out where everything's placed. We are now going to draw the same shape that we drew before, but using the relative coordinate system. Before we do this, a brief explanation is required as to how the measurements are entered. In our previous system, we typed in the X value, a comma, and then the Y value. If you remember, a horizontal line meant there was no Y value and was written, for example, 15,000, 0, whereas a vertical line had no X value and was written 0, 15,000. When we draw using the relative coordinate system, we encounter two symbols we use regularly. The @ symbol tells AutoCAD the measurements are relative, and the greatest and symbol tells the program there's an angle. This introduces greater flexibility, as it's possible to enter angles such as 45 degrees without typing in lots of numbers. 45 degrees would be a simple matter of just typing in 15,000, 15,000, as the distances would be the same. However, it's not unusual to meet angles such as 22.5 or 37.5, and it would be very time consuming to try and work out the values to use in absolute coordinates. AutoCAD is unusual in the way it references the coordinates. 90 degrees is anti-clockwise from 0 and so on. In the square I am drawing, the commands are as follows. The line goes from 0, 0 to at 1000 at an angle of 90, then at 1000 for an angle of 0, at 1000 and an angle of 270, and finally at an angle of 180. I'm not sure why they chose to do the angles the way they did, it's just AutoCAD convention. Now we have an idea of the way relative coordinates work, it's time to start drawing our figure. A good practice is to mentally map out which line goes where in terms of relative coordinates. I will erase the square I drew for the previous example and we'll begin with the shape we drew in our previous exercise. We are now having a look at the completed figure to remind ourselves of the dimensions of the relevant lines. I will now erase it and we will start to draw the figure from the beginning. Once more, we will start with the first vertical line. Type line to start the command, and as before, our start point is 0, 0. This will not change whether we use absolute or relative coordinate systems for our drawing. The next part of our line command is to type at 15,000 with an angle of 90 degrees. This tells us the line is 15,000 millimeters long and at an angle of 90 degrees, in other words, a vertical line. Next, we add the first horizontal line. To do this, we type at 15,000 with an angle of 0. Notice that the distance always comes first, followed by the angle. As it is the angle that does the work in relative coordinates, the distance is always at the beginning of the measurement. From here, we add our second vertical line. As it goes down, the value of the angle changes from 90 to 270 degrees. Type in at 10,270 as an angle. We now move on to the second horizontal line. As the line goes from right to left, rather than left to right, the angle is 180 degrees. We therefore type in at 10,000 with an angle of 180. For our third and final vertical line, we type in at 5,270. The line is vertical and going down, so the angle is 270 and not 90. Lastly, we add our final horizontal line by typing at 5,000 with an angle of 180. This closes our shape. Notice that once we have the hang of how the angles work, creating the shape is a lot quicker than drawing it using the absolute coordinates method. This is one of the main reasons that relative coordinates are used for the majority of drawings in AutoCAD. In our next exercise, we will be looking at the offset command to convert our basic shape into the plan of a simple building.